Good day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly with the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Fostering Resiliency with Good Market Design, Lessons from Texas. We are grateful to our speaker, Dr. Peter Crampton, for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations, along with a host of other products and services that you can find at our website at www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matter in regards to today's webinar before I hand things over to our speaker. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated sufficient time at the end of the webinar to address your questions. And now I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Peter Crampton, Professor of Economics at the University of Cologne and the University of Maryland. Peter, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Just will take a second. Good. Yes, so I'm going to be talking about a tragic event in Texas that happened in mid-February of 2021, just over a year ago. And it's an event that's relevant to every electricity market in the world. And it's very important for us to learn from these crises. And that's what I'm going to talk about. We're very much in the learning mode and trying to make sure this doesn't happen again in Texas or in any other market as best we can. This is Texas mid-February 2021, and Texas doesn't normally work like this. It's very southern part of the United States, and it's usually quite warm. The big reliability event is having enough electricity for air conditioning in August when it's very, very hot. But it does occasionally get cold, and it got extremely cold in February 2021, as I suspect most of you know. Now, there we go. The lead actor in this event was, of course, the weather, but it's very important to recognize that there are many interconnected systems that affected the outcome. And the weather played the lead role, but then the gas infrastructure was extremely important, electricity, water. Those are the interconnected systems that I'm referring to, and all of these are affecting people in dramatic ways. During this event, approximately 246 people died over a period of 4 days. There was property damage estimated around $130 billion, so extremely large. The spot electricity market printed $55 billion during the 4-day event, which is quite large, and there were about 10 billion or so was unhedged, and so which led to some number of bankruptcies, although that was actually fairly modest. To give you a sense of the event, this is here's looking at 3 recent cold snaps: 2021, the most recent, 2011, 10 years before, and 1989. And as you can see from this representation of the cold snap, the extreme cold in 2021 was much worse than in these other cold snaps, although the temperatures are actually very similar to 1989, much colder than 2011. But the breadth and length of the event was much longer in 2021 than in 1989. And that was part of the problem. And this sort of event is much worse for a market like Texas than, say, a hurricane, because the hurricane is affecting especially the coastal counties. It's not affecting it's affecting the whole system to some extent, but not to the extent of this extreme cold. This affected every county in Texas. Extreme strain on the system. It was a systemic event, as we will see. There have been, over the last 120 years, lots of extreme cold snaps in Texas. So we can look back at the history. There's some that argue that the frequency of these events is increasing with climate change. Whether that's not the case, there certainly has been a history of every 10, 20 years of some extreme events that the system needs to be prepared for. And this is just another depiction of how 2021 was substantially colder than, say, 2011, which was the, I sat on the board at this time, and I was told that this 2011 event was just terrible, and what was the extreme event that we used to check our reliability during extreme winter. That was the extreme storm, winter storm event. And so, but unfortunately, we're hit with something much worse. And that was one reason for the tragedy. This is a very nice paper in Nature Energy by Gruber et al. And it shows, it does a simulation of the various cold snaps for the last 71 years, and evaluates, given the cold and other factors making the years comparable, what sort of outage you would expect if the market was sized the way it was in 2021. And again, you see that in the bottom right there, the 2021 event was longer and more severe than most, but there were actually many other events. So this is something that's well worth building the system to manage. And unfortunately, we weren't there. So let me say a few words about the approximate causes of the event. Essentially, the extreme cold did two things that attacked the electricity system. The first is supply. It led to large systemic outages that greatly reduced supply, and at the same time, it led to enormous increases in demand. And that's what created the gap that was unsustainable for the electricity system operator, ERCOT. And as you can see here, the fall off in gas happened well before there were any outages. The electricity outages began on Monday, February 15th, and already by Friday, there was a sharp decline in gas production and gas delivery throughout that weekend, causing problems already over the weekend, but those problems just got worse as the week began on Monday and the outages began. Here you can see the fall off of gas, sort of the failure of gas leading the failure of electricity, and where we had a 45% drop in production during the storm. And there is, of course, some amount of storage, but the storage is inadequate for the most part. And there's a lot of reliance on real-time delivery of gas production. And that's one of the problems. There needs to be more storage, and the storage needs to be robust to winter events. Here's the prices across the United States, and this event affected prices around the world. LNG prices in Japan were immediately affected by this event. But you can see in the United States, this is the middle of the storm, gas prices are over 100 times normal in Texas at this point. And even places as far away as Los Angeles has prices that are 30 times the norm. So the impact of prices around gas around the country is dramatic. As I mentioned, the 2011 event, 10 years before, was thought of as being an extreme winter event. And after that event, when there was some minor shortages for a very brief period of time, ERCOT did a study that looked at the vulnerability of gas supply to cold temperature. And in this study, it's actually very interesting. If you look at the panel on the left, it shows the loss of gas production as a function of temperature. And when we had temperatures similar to the 1989 cold snap, which is very similar to the 2021 cold snap, there was 45% drop in gas production, and which is exactly what we had in 2021. So you can see that this is a long-term problem in Texas. It's not something that was fixed, say, after 1989 or 2011. It continues to this day and remains a serious issue for the vulnerability of electricity during winter storms. I want to begin by, now that we've looked at the weather, I want to look at this event from the point of view of a trader. And then I'll look at the point of view of the system operator, and then we'll come to electricity market design and what can be done to address this issue so that it doesn't happen again or is less severe in any event. So here is Saturday, and keep in mind Monday is the beginning of outages. But here is Saturday morning, and already the real-time price is pretty much at its maximum of $9,000 per megawatt hour, and pretty much across Texas. And this is largely because of the enormous demand and already the failure of many generating units, creating a shortage. When we look, again, this is from a trader's perspective, looking at the market, we can see that, approaching Saturday, we're already having these short-term events of extreme prices in the real-time market. The day-ahead prices are in the $1,000, $2,000 range already on Saturday, the weekend, before we've had any outages. So the market's sending the right price signals. But here's the really scary part in blue at the top, looking at the 7-day forecast. The forecast here is extreme. So it's because of the extremely cold temperatures, the fact that a majority of Texans heat their homes with electricity, and 80% of the new homes with electricity, means that this extreme cold is going to greatly expand demand. And that's shown in this forecast, which is achieving levels that are above the summer peak. The winter peak is normally around 55 gigawatts. And so we're 20 gigawatts over a typical winter peak. And the market is just not going to be able to handle that. So already on Saturday morning, we know that there's going to be severe problems beginning on Monday and for several days, as long as this extreme cold maintains. And that's So that's very scary, and the price response is completely appropriate. That the prices go sky high, anticipating this shortage, because whenever there's a shortage, then the price is going to be up at $9,000. Now, this is again traders' perspective, looking through the week and seeing what actually happened during this shortage. The first segment there is before shortage begins, and then in the middle you can see the shortage starting on the 15th, and it's significant. So it's not 1 or 2 gigawatts, it's 10, 20 gigawatts, and that was also a big part of the problem, the enormous magnitude of the shortage, which made it very difficult to rotate the controlled outages. And that, of course, led to lots more hardship and damage. So what this also shows in red there, you can see the outages of the thermal plants. Gas, especially gas, Texas relies enormously on gas, and increasingly so, but also coal and to a lesser extent nuclear. All three failed, believe it or not, with very rapid outages as the temperatures plummeted on early Monday morning. By contrast, so wind and solar did experience some outages, especially wind at times, but overall wind and solar performed better than expected in a winter storm scenario. So it was really on the supply side, it was the loss of the gas units and other thermal units that created the severe problem. Now, but on the demand side, of course, it was just the extreme cold and the people trying to heat their homes. Now let's turn to the system operator's perspective, and this is 1 a.m. on Monday, the 15th of February, and already at 1 a.m. there are 35 gigawatts of generation that is out, capacity that's out. Much of it because of the extreme cold. But around 1:30, outages started to happen, and that was actually the beginning of the load shedding. Was at 1 a.m. when we entered the, given the extent of the outages and the amount of demand, the first gigawatt was shed. But then the outages became much more frequent, and the frequency fell and started to actually plummet. And this is where the system operator had to take very swift actions to shed load in order to maintain the frequency. And you can see the load shedding in red, and finally the system operator was able to turn the frequency drop around and get it back up to 60 hertz to maintain the stability of the system. But this happened all very quickly, and then the units went out, and then basically for the most part stayed out until it warmed up a few days later. And so here's the fossil units, or actually the thermal units, gas, coal, and nuclear, and you can see them just falling off very quickly and creating the large gap in supply and demand, necessitating the outages, and then those were sustained for multiple days, and that was a big part of the problem. This is a sequence of the 6 days sort of before the storm and then at the end of the storm, looking at the outages across all of Texas. And you can see, and on the east, I'm sorry, on the west side, we've got the primarily wind resources. And on the right side, the east, we have the primarily gas resources, gas and coal, but primarily gas. And most of the people live in the east. And so what this is showing, the size of the circle is the magnitude of the outage in the particular county, and then the color indicates how this differs from what we would expect in a winter storm. And again, you can see that the wind is pretty much operating. That's on the left-hand side, the west, and it's pretty much operating as expected or a bit better. But what really triggers the event is all the failure of all of these thermal units on the east, close to where the load is. And the outages don't end until later on, after it warms up. So let's talk about the response to this event. And first we can look at the state legislature. This, of course, is a huge event. And one of the challenges of electricity markets actually is when you have a crisis, it's a political event. And so the politicians step in, and ideally, they step in a way that is positive or at least not destructive. And that's not always the case. It's very hard to manage. And that's one reason why good plans are absolutely important. And it's one of the major costs of a crisis if steps are taken that are actually adverse to the market. But if we look at what the legislature did in Texas, the first thing that they did was they banned retail plans tied to the wholesale price. And to me, this is unfortunate because we actually need price responsive demand in order to make the market more resilient. And I'll talk about that in a moment. And Texas was very innovative in having two suppliers, Griddy and Octopus Energy, that had plans that tracked the wholesale cost. And these were early on innovations. And so unfortunately, they did not include hedges that protected the consumer from downside risk. And that was the reason for this ban, the strong reaction by the legislature. And it really wasn't that important for the event because there's only 28, by the time the event happened, there were about 28,000 customers with this plan out of 26 million. So it really wasn't important for the grand scheme of things, but it is important for going forward, as I'll emphasize in a moment, that the encouraging demand response is very important, but we need to do so in a way that limits downside risk for the consumers so we can avoid these sorts of political reactions, which are very natural, but unfortunately not constructive. Another thing that was done was that the independent directors of the ERCOT board were all non-Texans, and that was viewed as unacceptable. I was one of them, and we were asked to resign. And now we were replaced with political appointees that are all Texans. There was legislation that improved communications. That's a very positive thing. There's improved reporting, which is very positive. There's winterization requirements of gas. And these would be very positive, except for they're fairly weak. And determined by the Railroad Commission, which is the regulator of gas, and has a history of being more an advocate of the gas industry rather than representing the interest of consumers. And so it's not clear how that's going to go. Practice load shedding events. That's absolutely a wonderful idea that will improve resiliency, and so that's a good thing. And then there were some other issues around critical, having the information and critical infrastructure protected, and all of that is quite positive. So there was a mixture of positive things and negative things. To characterize this event, I wouldn't characterize it as a reliability event. I would characterize it as a resilience event. Reliability is sort of the day-to-day bread and butter of keeping the lights on and being able to respond to random outages that are, especially in peak times, that are not systemic. Whereas resilience is all about systemic events. And you want your system to be robust to handle these systemic events where you have many outages, or something's happening on the supply side or the demand side, or both, that's system-wide. And these are the very big events that are front page news. This is going to be more and more an issue going forward as we become more reliant on electricity rather than less. There's 4 stages of resilience. There's before, where we're doing everything we can to prepare for possible resiliency events. Then there's during, where we're working very hard and effectively to alleviate the problem and minimize its impact. Then after, we're recovering as quickly as possible, bringing things back to normal. And then there's the learning stage, which is what we're in right now, where we're observing, understanding what happened, and improving the systems to make the system more robust in the future. And that's what I'm going to talk about now is, what do we need to do? And then I'll turn to Q&A. So I want to start with the easiest thing, which is improve communications. And it's easy, but it's extremely important. There's lots of different parties involved, and the communication needs to be effective everywhere. In the Texas event, I think the biggest problem was with respect to communication. There was the system operator, of course, sending out real-time communications and very forward-looking, 7-day forward load forecasts and so on to the service providers, the distribution companies and generators, and also talking to the governor's office. And so this is all happening, and it's, I think, working pretty well. To me, the biggest weakness was the governor's office not stepping forward and days before the storm explaining what was going to happen, because it was well known what was going to happen, that there were going to be substantial outages. The exact magnitude was not known, but certainly 10 gigawatts would have been no surprise sitting on Saturday thinking about what might happen on Monday. And so the discussion ideally could have been more of an instruction to an alert to the Texans on how to manage it and how to prevent freezing pipes, how to, what are the implications of keeping your thermostat set high rather than reducing it and getting out your jackets and sweaters. And so, messages like this as a public service message from the governor could have been very effective, I think, in reducing destruction caused by freezing pipes with folks that aren't familiar with what one does in preparation to a big freezing event. And then also the facilitating the common good of encouraging everyone to turn their thermostats down, and that this would have an enormous impact on reducing the outages across Texas. But unfortunately, that didn't happen so well. The other big thing that needs to happen is improving the critical infrastructures that are essential for resiliency. And on the supply side, I've already mentioned the importance of gas. So natural gas has to be made more resilient to extreme cold for Texas to have reliable electricity. It's just gas is relied on, and there's going to have to be storage. If we can't rely on gas on the pipelines, then we have to have storage at the site of the generating units. And many of them were dual fuel, but they ran out of their fuel oil, and they couldn't get delivery because of the transportation infrastructure was basically out, and the trucks couldn't get through, and deliveries couldn't be made. So this is something that's extremely critical, and it's one of the bigger challenges in Texas, as I said, because of the politics. If there was any, everyone was a loser in this crisis, except for those on the gas supply. So the gas supply basically made billions of dollars during this event. Not everyone, but overall. And so it's sort of unfortunate that the absence of their resiliency actually created this enormous shortage, which then led to profits, despite the fact that 45% of the quantity was lost. The second thing is on the demand side, that's very huge, and that is energy efficiency and price responsive demand. But first, let me mention energy efficiency. That this is something that is critical in pretty much all markets, but especially markets that have fairly poor energy efficiency, such as Texas, because energy has been so cheap. It's actually made sense to be less energy efficiency conscious when energy is so cheap. But the problem with that is it's really dangerous, because if you're counting on cheap electricity, then you're actually going to have huge demands during these extreme events, and that's going to hamper your resiliency. If energy efficiency really brings its enormous value during these extreme events, when demand is reduced the most relative to what it would be with less energy efficiency. And this is just a picture showing how the levelized cost of energy efficiency is so low relative to alternatives. The electricity markets everywhere in the world are changing rapidly. Over the next 20 years, we're in a period of rapid innovation. And so all electricity markets need to redouble their efforts in terms of making sure that this innovation is happening and that it is managed appropriately. The new technologies are introduced effectively. And this is going to require an enormous amount of work by all of us. Electricity design does matter. Texas had and has an excellent electricity market design, in my mind. That the core element is the spot market, where a highly efficient financial day-ahead market is used for scheduling resources, where we co-optimize energy and reserves to maximize as-bid social welfare, subject to all the network and generation constraints. And this works extremely well. And then each hour leading up to real time, it's re-optimized and reconfigured as necessary, and then we step into the real-time physical dispatch market and settlement, which also co-optimizes energy and reserves. Essentially the same problem, we just have less flexibility at this point, since resources have been committed or not. And so this is an excellent combination, works very well. It's a nodal market, of course, and so that's not what needs to change, but certainly there's things that can be enhanced. And these, I've listed a number of things. The ones in orange are the ones that are ongoing initiatives already that pretty much all markets are working on, and ERCOT certainly is. Such as improved forecasting, it's becoming very, very important. And actually the forecasting was excellent during this event, but it always will need to be improved, especially as we add more and more renewable resources. We need improved analysis of resiliency and reliability, and I think this is where we fell short, that we weren't looking at extreme enough events, that 2011 was not a good benchmark for an extreme winter storm. We had to go back further in time to see something more like the 2021. All markets need to encourage price responsive demand. This is something that's going to be a big factor, I think, in improving resiliency. Integration of battery storage is going to be very important. Distributed generation. One thing that Texas was missing was a winter circuit breaker. So essentially the circuit breaker that was in the market rules was a summer circuit breaker, and it did not work in the winter. And so that's something that is being fixed. And as a result of the failure of the winter circuit breaker, there were issues about repricing that are problematic. And so, ideally that can be avoided with proper circuit breakers, where the high, you only have the extremely high price, so long as it's doing some good. And when it's not doing good, then you can back off and have a less extreme price. Other things that should be on the table are things facilitating liquid and efficient forward trade. I recommend the system operator getting involved in the forward energy market that could be highly transparent and efficient in letting the market participants better manage risk. In the future, moving towards a 24 rolling settlement might be desirable as more and more storage and renewable generation comes on board. The opportunities for re-optimizing and the diversity of assets are so great that the greater flexibility of 24 rolling settlement is probably a good idea. And then the same thing in real time, having a rolling 60-minute look ahead is probably a good idea. Now, one thing, one natural question is reliability of public good, and the answer is yes, if there's no demand response, but the better markets are going to encourage robust demand response eventually, and that's going to make reliability more of a private good, which is a good thing. Once you have robust demand response, then in fact reliability is no longer a problem, and resilient, and you're much more resilient to all sorts of events. The Texas does not have a capacity market, and so some have said, well, the problem was that without a capacity market, this is what happens. And that's actually not, the absence of a capacity market was not at all the problem. There was plenty of capacity, and there was plenty of motivation for that capacity to generate energy. The problem was the systemic failure of large quantities of supply. And having a capacity market would not have resolve that. Now, one thing that would have helped, and I think is a very good idea, as I said, is having improved liquidity in forward energy trading. And this can be done by the system operator conducting a forward energy market. I outline a proposal here, and there's now technologies for trade of a diversity of related products, such as all of the forward energy products you would want, say, going from current month up to 4 years ahead. Trade in these market participants, whether on the generation side or the demand side, can rebalance positions and make adjustments as their circumstances changes quite effectively in such a world. And I propose one technology for doing this. Looking forward, we have to think of climate policy and have a coherent climate policy that is going to lead to sustainable development. It appears that at first blush, it seems like everything's on course. What's being built in the United States, as is true pretty much everywhere, is a bunch of wind and solar. And that's just great. And what's leaving is coal and natural gas, and that's great too. But the problem is it's not happening fast enough. So here is the current state, well, in 2020, and you can see it's still dominated by natural gas and coal in the United States. And it's moving in the right direction, but it's moving very slowly, only about 4% turnover each year. And so that needs to accelerate with good climate policy. So I mentioned, I'm going to mention very quickly research that we're doing modeling the energy transition to see how alternative climate policy and alternative electricity market design impacts outcomes over the next several decades as we move through the energy transition. And this is actually very difficult modeling work because we need a long-run model, multiple decades. We can't have a steady state model because we're actually interested in what happens, not just in the long run, but along the way, which is taking place over multiple decades. And we really need to model the energy market because the returns that resources are going to get in which is going to affect their investment decisions, is very much dependent upon the mix of resources and how that mix evolves over time. And so what we do in our model is actually model the full details of the energy market and the reserve market day ahead in real time, and estimate quite accurately how profits depend upon the resource mix. And then we find an equilibrium path with enormous computation that includes full modeling of storage resources that are directly optimized within the system, price responsive demand, which is expanding over the energy transition. And then one other thing that we did recently is with respect to price responsive demand, was look at how much response there is of households currently to these dynamic plans. So we did this with data, household level data from Great Britain, and measured quite a sharp response to high prices, and then what we did was we looked at, well, what would happen if Texans were price responsive in some fraction of Texans were price responsive in the way that the Great Britain customers that faced a retail price that tracked the wholesale cost behaved. And what we found is that actually, if you had just a minority, just 44% of Texans responding to the price the way these Great Britain customers did, then you would have sufficient demand response to completely wipe out the shortage. And so this is just one early piece of evidence and how important price responsive demand can be in making a market more resilient to extreme events, especially systemic events affecting the whole system. And of course, these technologies are improving enormously, and as they improve at the household level, consumers will more readily be able to respond to price. Not really, I don't see the consumer themselves responding directly by watching the price, but more the devices in the home will be controlled with the input of high-level input of the consumer, and then but the algorithms will manage these systems to create enormous value for the electricity system, which will be enjoyed by the consumers and foster, and further encourage things like distributed generation. And I want to finish up and then take Q&A. The last thing I want to mention with respect to Texas is interconnection. Texas is poorly interconnected, and that is by choice, largely because Texas wanted to be independent of federal oversight, largely. And that's made possible by less interconnection. And I think ultimately that's not a good thing for Texas. Texas has phenomenal wind and solar resources and can contribute a lot to the United States and become the energy capital of the future rather than the legacy capital of energy in the United States by having stronger interconnection and then continuing to export large quantities of energy, in this case, wind and solar, to the rest of the US. The reason I mention it last is because this is not something that's going to happen quickly. So this is going to be a very slow process that will happen over multiple decades, but it's something that should be definitely on the agenda today and studied and planned. And it's absolutely critical. It's just not the immediate thing that's going to keep the lights on in, say, 2023. So with that, I'm going to turn to Q&A, but my bottom line is the Texas event was a very tragic event. It's a very important event in terms of understanding how we can improve things in order to make our electricity systems more resilient. And it also emphasizes the essential need for this in our modern world as we go forward. And we've got phenomenal tools now with which to model our electricity market design choices and our climate policy choices, and to do the planning and development that's needed to make our systems more resilient. And that's the path that we need to be headed on. So with that, I'm going to open up the Q&A. I haven't seen the Q&A yet. So So there's lots of questions here. I won't be able to answer all of them, but the total, in terms of the total market in ERCOT, it's the peak is 75 gigawatts, roughly. It's almost 80 gigawatts now in the summertime typically, and the total thermal capacity is well below that. There's lots of other resources, especially wind, but the but actually thermal is probably around 70 gigawatts total. So not that much is counted on from the wind and solar resources, of course, during these extreme events. Is ERCOT considering a version of the capacity market? That actually is not on the table right now. That may change, but since the event wasn't a capacity issue, I think that it probably will not rise on the agenda. So I think that there's other responses, that there are many other responses that they're working on. Would reforms to improve reliability, demand response, and liquidity work if we were facing a whole winter of supply shocks? And here, it's a question of degree, but I think if these reforms are done well, then the answer is yes. The improving liquidity and forward trading, the big thing that does is it reduces the amount of unhedged quantity, which means that you can rely on very high scarcity prices without folks going bankrupt. And that's really nice. And so basically the parties can better manage risk. And when they have unbalanced positions, then the collateral that they maintain as security increases in response to that unbalanced position. And so, I think that this is actually an important feature, giving the participants a way to manage risk in a very effective way. So here's another question. So what level of investment would it take to make the thermal generation, especially gas, more resilient? And how should Texas decide how much money to put into creating that level of resiliency if we're moving rapidly to a system with more clean energy, storage, distributed generation? How can the clean future be realized to make Texas less dependent on gas for power generation? Well, it actually is being realized. So we are very much reliant upon gas for during extreme events, but it's becoming a smaller piece of the total energy generation, and that's going to continue, certainly. But it's actually, this is a very good question about how can we maintain the incentives for continued investment in gas when gas's capacity factor is going to continue to fall as we become more and more renewable. And the answer is we're going to have some frequency of very high prices, and in the spot market. So that's sort of a necessary condition to motivate the gas that's and other thermal resources that's going to be used a lot less, only in those more extreme events. But then if we do have more liquid forward energy trading, then they will be compensated through long-term forward trades, essentially having some amount of, that's going to be the vehicle which will limit the risk and complete reliance on extremely high spot prices. So I see this as we're moving in the right direction. We've got the basic elements there, and it's just we have to continue to redouble our efforts to make sure that the resiliency is improved and that there aren't any holes in our energy supply during extreme events. And a big part of that resiliency is also must come from the demand side. So that would be one major takeaway, is the demand side is going to have to be more price responsive and have higher energy efficiency. So which measures is ERCOT considered likely to implement? And I should say, I had a bunch of things that were extremely likely, because they were all being worked on, are actively being worked on now, and some of which are implemented already. And so I think that most of the things I talked about are going to be implemented. I think that the biggest unknowns are things like, will they step in and be more active in forward energy trading? So far, system operators have done some. The day-ahead market is, of course, a forward market. And then the FTR market from transmission rights is a forward market as well, that's organized by the system operator. But this would be a sort of a bigger step, but very much consistent with like a capacity market, which is partly physical and partly a financial forward when properly designed. So let's see, I've got just 3 minutes. So let me do 1 or 2 more questions. What type of hedging mechanisms for customers facing real-time prices do you think would help increase responsiveness of demand? And so here it's, they can be, from my point of view as an economist, the most obvious is simply having your service provider buy forward your expected demand. And that, what that does is it, first of all, your service provider has all this data and can use artificial intelligence to machine learning to forecast your forward consumption, and then buy forward at the much more stable forward prices. And then your response during an extreme event like Winter Storm Uri in February 2021 is simply upside for you. You've actually bought forward your expected consumption, and now you can turn the thermostat way down, put the sweaters on, and then at the end of the month receive a check for $1,000 or $2,000 or whatever it is based upon the duration of the event. So to me, that would be a very natural one. Now, I think that the challenge is finding a way to explain it to consumers, and that is that can be done in, I think, fairly straightforward ways. But the biggest thing is turning it into essentially eliminating the downside and turning it into simply the upside. And then the consumer who really is very averse to loss is going to feel protected and more apt to be willing to be responsive. But probably the biggest thing that helps here is electric vehicles. if you have an electric vehicle in your garage that's plugged in, it's got a huge battery, and that can generate a lot of value for you if you let the system manage the charging and eventually discharging of that battery during emergency events. And so I actually see the adoption of electric vehicles as being another huge thing in promoting price responsive demand. And the last thing I'll say about prices responsive demand, because we have reached the hour, and I'll turn it back to Rebecca, is that you don't need everyone to be responsive. You just need some significant fraction to greatly improve resiliency. And so I think there's actually lots of hope for that. So it's perfectly fine if you are a customer that doesn't want to respond to price, that's fine. And there can be an enormous quantity of you. But what you just need is a significant fraction that wants to respond. And like I said, everybody with an electric vehicle wants to be price responsive. So that will come. So let me now turn it over, since we're on the hour, I'll stop my share and turn it back to Rebecca.
IAEE wishes to thank Peter Crampton for an outstanding webinar. This webinar will be available on IAEE's website for future download. If you're not already a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.
Thank you very much.